You step outside on a warm summer morning. You look down at the cracks in the pavement. The tiny, frantic black lines marching toward a dropped crumb are completely gone. You might feel a brief flicker of relief that your kitchen and your picnic are finally safe from an uninvited invasion. But that sudden, empty stillness is actually the sound of a global biological time bomb starting to tick. Are you prepared to watch the world suffocate? These relentless insects have been doing the brutal, heavy lifting of planet Earth for 140 million years. They are not simply backyard pests. They are not frustratingly persistent dinner guests. They are the invisible, highly disciplined engineers of the entire natural world. Their resilient ancestors survived devastating asteroid impacts, global volcanic eruptions, and multiple freezing ice ages by turning the Earth itself into an impenetrable subterranean fortress. How exactly did they become the foundational glue holding everything in nature together? To truly understand what would happen if they vanished tomorrow, you must travel back in time to the violent age of the dinosaurs. You must look at how they claimed the Earth in the first place. During the brutal Cretaceous period, new flowering plants began to explode across the prehistoric landscape, creating entirely new ecosystems. Small, solitary, wasp-like creatures descended from the high forest canopy. They began to fiercely hunt in the complex, dangerous shadows of the forest floor. Over millions of years of brutal, unforgiving evolution, they sacrificed their wings and their solitary freedom for a much greater purpose. What did they actually gain in return? They gained the extraordinary ability to dig, to hide, and to completely conquer the soil. They developed an incredibly complex chemical language, communicating entirely through invisible trails of volatile pheromones. This revolutionary chemical network effortlessly allowed 1 million individual bodies to move, react, and fight as a single, devastating superorganism. How powerful is this ancient collective mind? In the late 20th century, legendary evolutionary biologists dedicated their entire lives to uncovering the hidden, silent mechanics of this miniature empire. They spent decades painstakingly observing how these tiny creatures manipulate the massive physical world around them. They proved that the sprawling colony operates identically to a living human body. Every single worker is merely a disposable cell, furiously working to keep the queen, the beating heart of the colony, alive forever. How many of them are actually out there? Recently, astounded researchers calculated a population number that completely defies human comprehension, utilizing extensive field sampling across every continent except Antarctica. They estimate there are roughly 20 quadrillion of them alive on the planet right now. That massive figure equals roughly 2.5 million of these creatures for every single human being on Earth. If you were to somehow place all the wild birds and all the wild mammals on one side of a giant planetary scale, and all of these tiny foragers on the other, the massive scale would violently tip in favor of the insects. Why does fragile nature desperately require such an absurdly massive, sprawling army? The brutal answer is buried deep in the dirt of the rainforests, the blistering deserts, and the dense temperate woodlands. Imagine a pristine forest floor somewhere deep in the Amazon basin. It appears perfectly peaceful, but it is actually a brutal war zone, completely disguised as a serene green landscape. Millions of dead leaves, rotting heavy branches, and the decaying bodies of fallen animals litter the damp ground every single hour of the day. If this incredibly thick, heavy layer of organic matter were left completely alone, the entire forest would rapidly choke on its own relentless decay. Who is directly responsible for stopping this suffocating rot? The underground empire is already mobilizing just beneath the surface. Millions of tiny, heavily serrated jaws slice through the rot with absolute surgical precision. They rapidly dismantle the heavy carcasses of deceased birds and small mammals, dragging massive pieces of fallen foliage and flesh deep into secure subterranean chambers. They are the supreme, unmatched scavengers of the wild. What happens when this great, tireless cleanup crew vanishes overnight? Within the very first week of their sudden disappearance, the natural world would begin to fester terribly. The tiny corpses of other insects, massive spiders, and small reptiles would quickly pile up in the dense undergrowth. This creates a thick, horrifying carpet of putrefaction. Traditional surface scavengers simply cannot keep up with the mess. Roaming vultures, laughing hyenas, and crawling carrion beetles completely fail to process the sheer, microscopic volume of organic death that falls to the earth on a daily basis, the overwhelming, toxic stench of unchecked decay would violently blanket the global forests. This horrific scent draws massive swarms of parasitic flies and spreads virulent bacterial diseases rapidly among vulnerable wild populations. But the rotting surface is only the very first, highly visible symptom of a terminal ecological illness. How long until the larger, more iconic animals genuinely feel the fatal impact? The terrifying wave of starvation would move swiftly and brutally up the intricate food chain. Creatures that rely almost exclusively on this specific subterranean food source would be the very first to vanish from the face of the earth. Armored pangolins in the dense, humid forests of Africa and Asia would desperately scour the earth with their exceptionally long, sticky tongues. They would find only empty, hollow tunnels and perfectly silent earthen chambers. Giant anteaters in the sweeping grasslands of South America would tragically starve to death within a matter of weeks. Their massive, highly specialized digging claws suddenly become completely useless. Where else can they desperately turn for food? Nowhere. Certain specialized species of northern woodpeckers, heavily armored horned lizards, and burrowing blind snakes would quickly follow them into the dark, irreversible void of extinction. But the localized collapse of these highly specialized predators is a highly predictable tragedy. The true, creeping horror lies in what happens to the physical earth itself for hundreds of millions of years. The sprawling, massive roots of giant canopy trees and delicate ground ferns have completely relied on a massive, hidden irrigation system. These underground engineers purposefully move vastly more physical soil than earthworms ever could in their lifetime. They continuously dig immense, highly complex vertical networks of tunnels that act as the living lungs of the earth. These hollow passageways allow heavy rainwater and vital, life-giving oxygen to penetrate incredibly deep into the dense, heavily compacted dirt. What occurs when the microscopic digging permanently stops? Without this constant, frantic, collective excavation, the exposed soil quickly hardens. It bakes into an impenetrable, concrete-like crust under the blazing sun. When the next heavy tropical rain eventually falls, the precious, desperate water completely fails to soak into the dying ground. It simply pools massively on the surface and violently washes away the nutrient-rich topsoil in devastating, unstoppable flash floods. Have you ever considered that a massive, ancient forest could literally drown simply because a tiny insect abruptly disappeared? Beyond simple physical irrigation, the roots of these towering ancient trees would violently starve for basic chemical nutrients. The subterranean empire acts as the greatest automated fertilizer delivery system in the complete history of our spinning planet, as the millions of workers relentlessly drag rotting organic matter deep underground to feed their young. They constantly excrete highly concentrated, nitrogen-rich waste. They deposit this life-giving fuel directly beside the deepest, most desperate roots of the ancient forest. Without this precise, daily chemical delivery, the grandest trees on Earth would rapidly begin to wither. They turn incredibly brittle and terribly weak. Their massive green canopies slowly thin out, allowing far too much harsh, burning sunlight to violently scorch the highly sensitive understory ferns below. Can anything halt this relentless cascade of botanical death? As the physical soil severely degrades and completely suffocates the giants, a totally silent and deadly crisis vigorously unfolds among the smaller ground plants. In temperate forests across the vast northern hemisphere, thousands of unique plant species rely on an incredibly specific evolutionary survival strategy. They deliberately coat their fresh seeds in a fleshy, nutrient-rich, lipid-filled appendage designed specifically to attract subterranean foragers. Why would a plant willingly give away its hard-earned biological nutrients? It is paying for an elite, heavily guarded transport service. The scouting workers joyfully find the seed and carry it potentially thousands of feet back to their highly secure underground bunker. They consume only the fleshy outer part, leaving the core reproductive seed perfectly planted in a safe, fertilized, climate-controlled subterranean chamber. Biologists have carefully documented this exact biological relationship for decades, heavily noting it as one of the most critical planting mechanisms on Earth. Without this elite, underground transport service, delicati, iconic wildflowers like trillium, spring violets, and bloodroot would violently drop their seeds directly onto the hardened, heavily rotting forest floor. The exposed seeds rapidly rot in the blistering sun or are quickly devoured by desperate, hungry rodents. Entire generations of vital, oxygen-producing plant life completely fail to sprout. Who will produce the breathable oxygen when they are gone? How many ecological dominoes will fiercely fall before the great forest canopy permanently collapses? But the subterranean empire does not strictly just plant seeds in the dark. They actively and violently defend the living, breathing vegetation. In the high canopies of the humid tropics, massive, highly aggressive colonies act as brutal, heavily armed bodyguards for specific native trees. They viciously attack any wandering caterpillar or grazing insect that attempts to eat the precious leaves. If the tiny, fierce bodyguards suddenly vanish, the global population of leaf-eating insects violently explodes, completely out of control. Massive, unstoppable, biblical plagues of ravenous caterpillars and voracious locusts swiftly strip the remaining, already weakened trees entirely bare. Who is left to effectively protect the vulnerable forest? No one. Are you beginning to see how deeply the ancient threads are woven? Within just a few short, agonizing years, the incredibly lush, vibrant landscape dramatically transforms. It becomes a totally barren, stifling, terribly silent wasteland. The great, heavy, grazing herbivores, from the most agile wild deer to the massively heavy roaming elephants, find their essential, daily food sources rapidly shrinking. The greenery permanently withers away into nothing but dry, brittle stems. The legendary, feared apex predators that aggressively hunt the massive herbivores soon face a total, localized extinction as their entire prey base totally evaporates. The highly coordinated, howling packs of wolves eventually starve in the freezing snowy mountains. The solitary, stalking big cats grow terribly thin in the rapidly fading jungle. The massively powerful roaming bears slowly collapse in the barren woodlands. The total, catastrophic collapse of an entire global ecosystem very rarely starts at the absolute top of the food chain. It violently and mercilessly unravels from the very bottom up. It rapidly severs the microscopic, completely invisible threads that fiercely bind all biological life together. Can any creature truly survive the breaking of these foundational, ancient threads? You always fiercely and romantically picture the large, roaring, heavily muscled beasts as the vital, irreplaceable keystones of wild nature. You enthusiastically place the golden, the majestic lion firmly on the absolute throne of the sweeping savanna. You boldly crown the howling gray wolf at the absolute peak of the snowy mountain. But the greatest, most devastating, mind-bending truth of the natural world is entirely paradoxical. Who really rules the earth? The true, undisputed apex predator and vital guardian of planet Earth does not have razor-sharp teeth, a terrifying, blood-chilling roar, or a massive, heavily muscled body. The absolute, undisputed rulers of this entire spinning planet are less than a single inch long. They are completely blind in many critical evolutionary cases, operating purely on a fascinating, silent chemical hive mind. Are you surprised by their immense, unseen power? If a massive pride of lions suddenly disappears from a vast grassland, the resilient ecosystem rapidly shifts. The local grazing prey overpopulates slightly, and the massive landscape eventually adapts beautifully to the brand new normal. What happens when the tiny earth movers permanently vanish? If the silent, the subterranean empire abruptly disappears, the physical earth turns immediately to solid, impenetrable concrete. The fragile, beautiful seeds permanently cease to sprout, and the very oxygen above it begins to physically disappear as the mighty, ancient forests wither and violently die. The wild, brutal, daily survival of absolutely everything on Earth heavily hinges on the frantic, microscopic digging of a tiny insect. It is a creature you can easily crush completely flat with your bare thumb. The most complex, ancient biological machinery of the vast, untamed wilderness is running beautifully right beneath your feet. It is quietly and efficiently holding the physical, breathing world together every single day. So the very next time you step outside on a warm summer morning, look down closely at the cracks in the gray pavement. Watch those tiny, frantic black lines marching intensely toward a dropped crumb. You are absolutely not looking at a meaningless, irritating pest determined to temporarily ruin your afternoon picnic. What are you actually witnessing? You are looking directly at the tiny, tireless, magnificent atlas silently holding up the entire massive weight of the world. If you found this deep, incredible journey into the hidden mechanics of wild nature utterly fascinating, subscribe to the channel right now. Turn on notifications so you never miss another wild truth.